I'm Natalie MacNeil, and you are watching She Takes on the World TV, your weekly dose of soaring inspiration and practical advice for your business and your life. Today, we're going to dive into what you need to know, legally speaking, as an entrepreneur. Big dreams have got to be built on solid foundations, and that means protecting yourself, protecting your trademarks, and just protecting your brand in general. You've probably heard the saying that a wise man builds his house on stone, whereas a foolish man builds his house on sand. If you cut corners when you're starting up or you're not protecting yourself, it means that you are building your dreams and your business on sand instead of stone. I know that you don't want that for yourself, and I don't want that for you either. So today I'm bringing in my friend and lawyer and founder of OurDeal.com, Mr. Kyle Durand, and we are going to cover the essentials of what you need to know to protect your business and your brand so that you can build your dreams on stone. Hello everyone. So joining me right now is Kyle Durand, and Kyle has helped me with all the legalities for the Conquer Club and the contracts for that, and he's also helped Natalie Sisson and I with We Mastermind and was part of our We Mastermind retreat. He is just a wealth of information, and today we're going to be helping you build a very strong foundation for your business. So Kyle, welcome, and thank you so much for doing this interview, because I think the legal stuff is what really scares people when they're building a business. And it doesn't have to be that scary.
No, it doesn't. And thanks for having me. I know that many people, when they see legal and financial stuff, their eyes, roll into the back of their head and glaze over, or they want to hide their heads in the sand,
Right.
because, like you said, this stuff is scary, and you hear a lot of bad, stories out there about people who did it wrong. You just don't want to know. Like, it's almost the ignorance is bliss
Right.
thing, right?
Exactly. Yes. And I know for a lot of people, and before we get started, let's everyone just take a deep breath. It's okay. We're going to work all of this out with you. Any financial worries that you're having and worries about structure and all the legalities and contracts and things like that, I promise you at the end of this interview, you're going to breathe a sigh of relief and be a much happier business owner. And like Kyle said, you're not going to be living in ignorance. You're going to really have that solid foundation. So Kyle, I think for a lot of people that starts with the structure of their business. And a lot of people have a hard time choosing the structure that is going to give them the optimal amount of protection, plus optimize their tax savings. That's a huge concern for a lot of people. So do you recommend that most people start with a sole proprietorship? And when do you recommend someone incorporate a business? Because that's a question I get asked all the time. Do I need to take that step and incorporate? For me personally, I got to a point where I did need to take that step. It was the best decision. I was also raising a round of financing, and as you know, you're not going to raise any funding if you're not in a corporate entity in most circumstances. So it was a really good decision for me, and I also feel like it almost changed my mindset around my business when I did incorporate. I felt like a real business. I felt like, okay, we've got stuff to do. Like, we've got to get the ball rolling. So I feel like it was a really good decision for me, not the best decision for most people. So can you help us understand when is the right time to leap into taking that step and incorporating?
Yeah, I have this theory I use with the people I work with. It's called the agile business, and I think your business structure and the amount of structure you have in place should grow and should change as your business grows and changes. You hear from a lot of sources out there. You start a business. You need to come in full bore and set up all this massive infrastructure, infrastructure, meaning, like the whole corporate structure. And you need to do shareholder meetings and blah, 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 blah. And exactly, you're like, oh, I'm just going to run away. I mean, forget it. And so my approach, the approach that I suggest is taking a more iterative approach. It's more of a testing and trying and putting the infrastructure in place that you need as your business grows. So, and that means putting it in place right before you need it, not after you need it, obviously. But so with many businesses, I do recommend, especially when you're first starting off, to start off as a sole proprietor. Just because, and that's counterintuitive to what a lot of people, a lot of people hear out there. But the reason I suggest this is because the barrier to entry, from an administrative point of view, is very low. Now,
Right.
there are a number of circumstances in which I recommend otherwise, those being when there's a potential for serious liability. So any personal or professional liability, you definitely want some sort of corporate or legal entity protecting you there. But when you're talking about potentially, I work with a lot of online entrepreneurs who produce, maybe some content or do some services that don't expose them to a lot of liability. With those entrepreneurs, a lot of times I do suggest they start off as sole proprietors.
Yeah. And I did for 3 years, and it was a structure that worked for me for those 3 years. And it wasn't until I was taking on more risk, like you said, and was getting to a point where I was going to be going out and raising funding that I decided that I needed to take that step. So it did take a few years, and it's sort of like a staircase, right? You like build up to what you really need, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the things that I suggest that the business owners look at when they're choosing a business structure they're varied, and one of them is the liability issue. How much personal liability will you be exposed to by doing your business? So if you're selling some sort of health supplement or some sort, I suggest there's a greater potential for liability. You probably want to put some sort of corporate or liability veil there. There are some taxation benefits, but when you're first of using different types of entities, but when you're first starting out, those really don't make much of a difference.
For sure.
Also, as you mentioned, when you're growing, when your business is growing, what's your growth strategy? So if your growth strategy involves bringing people in as partners or investors or co-owners of the business, then you definitely need some sort. I suggest that you put some sort of like corporate entity together, a business entity together to make that much more manageable. And then looking down the road as your business develops, you got to the growth strategy. Now, what's your exit strategy? Exit strategy, if you're just going to sell the whole business, or if you're going to sell off assets, or you're going to just liquidate or be acquired. So
yeah, I want to pause you there on the exit strategy for a second, because this is a point that I think a lot of people don't think about. It's not something that you think about when you're starting a business, because you're worried about getting the business started, not selling off the business, selling off the assets. And I mean, at some point you are exiting the business. Unfortunately, that may be morbidly with your death. It may be because you decide to sell, but at some point you are exiting. So what's a very basic exit strategy that someone who just has a very small business, like let's say I'm a small business owner, I do some coaching for my clients, and it's a new business, I'm a sole proprietor, what might my exit strategy look like? Is it a one-pager that I want to think about? What are those few key points that I really need to think about even when I'm just getting started?
For the exit strategy, one of the biggest things you're going to look at in your exit strategy is what assets does your business have? So if those assets are basically your services, then the exit strategy is going to be having someone come in and buy your client list, and have you be introducing this person to your clients and having them start to take over the business that way. Let's say, for instance, you're a software developer and you've developed a suite of software products. Then you have distinct assets that may be sold off to different companies, or have another company take over your company as a whole. So the exit strategy varies. So for a service provider, a lot of times your biggest asset is your client list and the relationships you've established with your clients. So when you start thinking about exit strategies, and I highly recommend at the beginning you do put some kind of thought into it. And it's going to change as your business grows. But systemizing your business is actually going to make your relationships with your clients a sellable asset later.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And is this something that you should involve a lawyer in early on? Like if I am just starting my small business, should I talk to a lawyer about my exit strategy, or is it something that I can just kind of have on a piece of paper and have an idea of it in my head for now?
I think generally when you're just starting off, you don't need the legal advice for the exit strategy because
Perfect.
it's so tenuous at that point. I mean, your end, as I mentioned, your exit strategy is going to evolve. So this should be essentially a living, breathing thing. So a living, breathing document, and it just
Excellent.
changes as your business grows and changes.
Okay, good. Because I know people get a little scared to, bring in lawyers or have to seek a lot of legal advice when they're starting up. So remember, you don't need to actually go and get this all done in legalese with a lawyer. It's something that you can do on your own. And there's another part of building a business that for me has been really important, and I didn't really think about it very much in the early days, but that was registering all of my trademarks. And what a lot of people don't know is that even if you don't register your trademark, for things like taglines, slogans, your logo, you can put that little TM symbol on it so that you'll have a little bit of protection if you ever needed to fight on, someone infringing on that brand. However, the maximum protection is going to come from actually registering the trademark. So do you recommend that people do trademark their names and taglines when they're getting started, or is that something that you hold off on until you've grown a little bit? What's your strategy there?
My strategy again is holding off on it
Hold off,
until,
okay.
yeah, until you understand or until you know that you have, again, an asset that's worth protecting there. It doesn't, in my estimation, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go about spending money
And
on.
it can be pricey. I
Right,
mean, it can
right.
be really pricey. I'm just getting She Takes on the World and the Conquer Club and those trademarks registered now. But when I was quoted, I mean, the first lawyer that I went to wanted to register them in all of the different regions and jurisdictions that we were going to be operating Conquer Clubs in. And this is all over the world. So the estimate was around $80,000 that I should be spending over the next 2 years to register all these trademarks. And I was just like, oh my goodness, like face plant, into the table. So now I'm just registering the US and the Canadian trademarks, and it's not too expensive because the US ones, even if you work with a lawyer, there's a lot of lawyers who do them for around $500 or $600.
Mhm.
So it can be fairly affordable if you find
Yeah,
the
and
right person.
that's a good example of the approach that I suggest is so your business has gotten to a point where those marks or those brands are assets. They've been adopted by the market. You know there's an asset there that's worth protecting. And so where should you protect it? Where are you going to be doing business? I mean, US and Canada. So that's where you're doing a majority of your business. And so that's where it makes sense to start with the protection. So if you start expanding to different areas of the world, then you can look at protecting those trademarks there. But it's interesting because the name thing really becomes a sticking issue for a lot of people in the beginning. And what I suggest is just do your own due diligence at the beginning, and go out there and search for domains. Do a Google search for the name. Go to, if you're in the United States, go to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and do a search. Make sure that it's not being used, and at that point, then you can go ahead and with some semblance of safety, go ahead and start using that name in commerce. And then once your business has grown, then go ahead and think about registering it.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. And again, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are really relieved to
Yeah.
hear all of that. And when do you absolutely need to have a contract? When you're doing a book, or you're birthing a passion project, or you're working on a new joint venture? Do you always need a contract? Or are there times when you can kind of get away with it?
So by legal definition, in the US and Canada, you don't need a contract. A contract is just an agreement between two people and consideration, like a trade of services or money for services. So legally, you don't need a contract. I say if the relationship or the work matters to you, you should have a contract. You should have a written document of some sort. And that can be anything. I agreed to do this for you at this point for this much money. Something
it can even be in an email, right?
Right, exactly. Anything. Because again, there's no, with very few exceptions, there's no specific format that needs to be followed for a contract. But what the contract does, and I'm not I'm not the fear mongering type. So I come at it from like this, hey, let's build something together approach. And if you're working with somebody, you obviously want to build something together with that person or create something. And one of the most important things to protect in that relationship is the relationship itself and the expectations.
Such a good point.
So if you sit down, a contract a lot of times will just bring everybody's expectations to light.
So important.
So that's why I say if the relationship, if the work matters or the relationship with the other person or other business matters, use a contract.
Love that. And I think you make it so easy for people to actually get templates of contracts, fill them in easily, and get them digitally signed through Our Deal, which you developed. And for everyone, if you don't know what Our Deal is, check out ourdeal.com. Kyle developed it. It's a very easy platform for you to use. You can just pull a contract. There's probably thousands of contracts on there now. You can pull which one you need, whether it's getting a website developed or you're entering a new joint venture or you're hiring a speaker or you're going to be a speaker for an event. There's all these templates that you can go fill in, use, and then send it to someone digitally. I've been using it now for She Takes on the World and for the Conquer Club. Kyle, I am absolutely loving the service, and I think it makes contracts really, really simple because not everyone has, $1,000, $2,000 to go to a lawyer and get a contract done for something like a joint venture or for some of these smaller projects that they're working on or they're working with a new contractor. So I love that you make it so, so simple.
Well, thank you. Thanks a bunch. And that warms my heart really to hear it because that's the whole goal of the softwares of Our Deal is to just make it easier for people to protect those relationships and to have better business relationships in general with people. And you bring up a very good point in that one of the places where a contract makes the most amount of sense really is when you're entering into business with someone in a joint venture or a partnership arrangement. For a while I did civil litigation. I was a corporate litigator, and the vast majority of the litigation I was involved in was these partnerships or joint ventures that were unwinding, and they had no roadmap for how they came together, what the expectations were, or how to get out of it. And so, essentially what the contract does is it makes you sit down and think about these things. All right, as you mentioned, everybody leaves a business eventually, and when you're doing business with someone else, one of those people especially is going to leave first. So what happens when that person leaves?
Right. Gotta have a prenup. It's like a marriage when you get into business with somebody and you've got to take it seriously.
Yeah. And so it doesn't have to be long and drawn out, and it's not about trust. I don't trust you, so we're going to sit down and do this. It's about, hey, look, you matter to me, our relationship matters, our business matters, so let's go ahead and do this and talk about these things.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point. When you sit down and you do that, it is about putting your personal relationship first, which should come first in business before the clients, before the money and all that. It's not that there's a trust issue or anything there. It comes down to protecting your personal relationship, which, for me, that's what I value the most, and that's what I worry about the most when I start working with someone who I have a personal relationship already, because I do think that as wonderful as it is if you can go out and search for that perfect co-founder who you don't already know, I feel like most joint ventures are born out of, two friends having an idea, or you meet someone at this event and you're kind of working in a similar space and you can both bring so much to the table, and you say, all right, let's try to do this together. And that's probably in your experience too. A lot of times the business partnerships are born from personal relationships, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's really important to understand, especially if you are going into business with someone you have a pre-existing friendly relationship with, or that person is in your entrepreneurial community. It's really important to maintain those relationships during and after this joint venture. And so, I mean, I myself have been involved in partnerships and joint ventures that have gone well and that have not gone well. Everybody has. If you're in business for long enough, it happens. And so, what's really important is the ones where it has gone well for me is we've had clear expectations at the beginning. We've had a clear roadmap for what happens when one of the partners or venturers wants to leave the business. And we just, all right, then you hit that switch and we start doing this to move on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When my first business failed, it was all because we were on a different page. I had business partners. They weren't the right partners for me at the time. And it all unwinded because we didn't have those expectations set from the beginning. So very, very important to everyone listening. Don't ruin a personal relationship when you're wanting to take on the world and do amazing things with your business. Now, another really important area that I want to jump into quickly, I know we're running out of time, is keeping the tax man happy while keeping your bank account happy and flourishing as well. So how can business owners make sure that happens? And I'm sure you've been in situations with people where they're being audited or where they've gone way too far down that road of not worrying about what's going to happen with taxation and all of that. So are there like a few things that you really recommend someone doing? And for me, this all started when I brought an accountant on board. And it completely turned my world upside down and was wonderful. And I mean, the investment that I made into hiring that person has paid off tenfold just in terms of how much they've helped me. So I'd love to hear your advice.
Well, yeah, as a tax attorney, I deal with a lot of unwinding situations and of helping businesses establish good, solid systems for finances and tracking finances and staying, administratively compliant.
And a lot of people don't do it. I mean, I talk to so many people, and even the clients that I'm working with, a lot of them are not doing what I think they should be doing in terms of tracking everything carefully and knowing where every penny goes.
Yep. Yeah. And so it sounds like it's a huge burden. And, you go to the bookstore and you're like, well, I want to learn something about accounting. And you see this big, thick book and you pull it out and you see balance sheets and debits and credits. You're like, oh my God.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so that's, again, like the legal stuff. It's one of these, I'm just going to bury my head in the sand, or I'm going to worry about it later. I don't have enough money to deal with it now, when I will deal with it later when I do have money. And really, that's not a very good approach, because our tax systems in Canada and in the United States and in most countries are set up in two different ways. One way is for the person who's the wage earner, and you get paid your wage, you pay your tax, or your taxes are withheld by your employer, and then you file a piece of paper at the end of the year, and that's it. And there isn't a whole lot you can do. There are a few things. But then there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of tax code for those of us who are running businesses. And that's where it seems overwhelming. But within those pages of the tax code are nuggets of value for you as the business owner. You can save tons and tons of money that the wage earner couldn't by taking advantage of some of these tax benefits. Right. And so the only way you can do that is if you're tracking your finances. And it's so easy these days to track your finances. The online software
So many
platforms,
tools.
they're just so cheap and easy to set up. They're automated. They'll pull all the data in your system for you. That's really the first step. When anybody comes to me, when I'm working with them in a legal and financial capacity, is I look at what kind of financial tracking systems do you have in place, and that's the first step.
Yeah, and I think you bring up some really good points because if you are staying on top of it, so for me, I use QuickBooks Online with my accountant. I use shoebox.com, so I send in all my receipts. They categorize them. You can export them to QuickBooks. Super simple. Um, I know a lot of people who love FreshBooks as well, who do freelance work and contract work. And if you start using some of these tools, it makes it so easy. And if you stay on top of it, within a tax year, there's a lot that you can do if you think you're going to have to pay more taxes. So I'm in a situation where last year I was able to work with my accountant to say, okay, maybe we should buy this right now, or maybe we should hold off on this. Maybe we should do this a little differently because I was on top of everything every month. But I know people who are now going through their accounting for last year, and unfortunately, if you haven't kept up with it throughout the year, there's not a lot you can do to sort of mitigate things. There is a lot you could do. I shouldn't say that. If you're working with an accountant, there's a lot of little things that they can find, but you can't really optimize your savings unless you're keeping on top of it throughout the year, because then your accountant can really make some amazing recommendations. Like last
Right.
year I saved thousands of dollars. It's a big financial decision when you stay on top of it because it's a lot more money in your pocket.
Well, you bring up a couple of different, very good points in that the data allows you to understand where your business is at any point. It gives you your financial dashboard, and you can't adjust without that data. So it's almost like tracking your analytics on a website, right? You can't adjust, you can't split test if you don't have the data. You
Yeah.
can't make strategic decisions for your business without knowing where you are, and that's what the financial data does. And in working with an accountant, that accountant can help you with looking at your data. So, for instance, I mean, to put some numbers to what we're talking about, one of my clients, we work with him on an ongoing monthly basis. He always comes to us for tax planning. We do some tax planning November timeframe. We were looking at his tax bill. He was going to owe $10,000 come tax time last year. So we were like, well, we have a month and a half to do some planning. We did some planning. At the end of the tax year, after we filed, he received a refund of $30,000. So that's a $40,000 swing that he was able
Wow.
to make. And of course, that's a giant swing. And that's why I use it as an example because it's so staggering. But I
Yeah.
mean, anybody can do this if you have the right data. I mean, I guess the first point is that you need that data in order to make these decisions.
So, Kyle, this has been really super helpful for me, and I'm sure for so many other people. So, thank you so much. Now, I like to leave people with some action items and some key takeaways. So, what are, just as a recap, three things that people absolutely have to do when they're starting a business or, launching a book or a passion project or going into a joint venture, whatever it is that they are entering into entrepreneurially? What are those three things that everyone should have on their radar and make sure they're doing properly?
Well, these are going to come as no surprise given our discussion. The first one is to set up your financial system. So, your QuickBooks Online, whatever that is, set up a financial system. It's vitally important, and it's really a necessity. It's not a nice to have; it's a must have for
Must
any
have.
business.
All right.
So the second one would be use a contract for all of your relationships, your business relationships. So that's your joint ventures, your partnerships, any independent contractor arrangement you get into when you hire a consultant, any relationship, business relationship. Just make sure you're using some sort of document for those.
Okay. So number two, contracts. And since you didn't recommend it yourself, I'm going to recommend that people check out ourdeal.com because it's a really affordable way And I'm just loving using it. It is, I mean, ever since I've started using it, I've just been saying, where has this been all of my business life for the last 3 years? It's exactly what I needed. So, okay, number 2, contracts, and what's number 3?
And the third one is to just keep your eye on where your business is going for the purpose of determining what the best structure is for your business. So we talked about you can start off with a sole proprietor. That may make sense for a lot of people, but as your business grows, this is something that you need to reevaluate on a regular basis. So the tip would be to start off with small steps, but understand where you're going when it comes to business infrastructure.
Love that. So 3 small steps, but know exactly where you're going. Kyle, thank you so much. Where can people find and connect with you?
You can go find me on at my website, kyledurand.com, and that has a links to all of my products and services, and you can shoot me an email from there just to say hi, or any questions you have.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I've got to say, you are my first man interview on She Takes on the World.
So this is the man show, huh?
This is the man show. He takes on the world. Kyle Durand. Yeah, we just haven't done it because we're always doing these interviews with women entrepreneurs. And I think this is such an important topic. And you've been so helpful for me in this area that I wanted to bring you on and ask you some of these key questions. So thank you so much. Kyle Durand takes on the world, and I will see all of you in the next episode of She Takes on the World TV. Thank you so much for watching again this week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
And today I'm going to be talking to you about something my business partner and I call the off price, to make sure that you are earning what you're worth and doing work that fulfills you instead of drains you.